It's September 19th, and we had our first frost already last night. So it's good for me to record that even for myself to look back on, and I'm going to start tracking when we have our last frost of the spring and our first frost of the fall every year. This year it seems to have come a bit early, but we have a very short growing season here in eastern Canada from around early to mid-June until about late September usually. And also in September, along with cold weather, we start to get a lot of moisture, usually rain, and that causes rot and mildew type problems. So I'd like to get a greenhouse established here, and that's sort of the framing you can see behind me. You can see a couple of the support beams I have running here. We filmed part one of this a few weeks ago, and I showed some of how we started this build. I'm going to go back to it today and try to get some of this straightened out. So already today I put in another support post over here on the corner, and you can see the brackets there at the top that help hold the beam that I have running here along the bottom. So now I have some support coming down this way. I could then put my middle beam across here and have that sit on this log that's adjoining the two. So our next step, I have to get some strapping and run some strapping along this to support the plastic that will eventually go over it. And I have to see that that strapping lines up with the top, middle, and bottom bar that we support beam that we have going across the roof of our greenhouse. So right here gives you a look at the support beam I put in today. I just measured from the rock up to the beam up there, added maybe a 1/4 inch so that it would tap into place. And I cut a beam for that length, put my 2 brackets on either side, and then bang that into place earlier to support the weight of the front of the greenhouse. So there's looking at the back of the greenhouse, the pole that supports it. From there up. And then we have a bar that attached or wired to that beam, and the lower beam down here, which is what now the middle beam rests on and is wired to right there. Just getting a measurement right now from the top beam to this middle beam, and it's showing 3 feet from there to there. I have to take a measurement on the other end of this where it ties into the building and make sure that this is the same distance on both ends from the top beam to here. The big test is to put this strapping now across from the top beam to the bottom beam and see if it lines up with and touches each of the 3 beams up here. This was the very difficult thing for me to try to figure out today. And so what I did is I cut a bracket here 14.5 inches across. I tapped this here in between the 2 wall studs so that it was in there firmly. And then I ran a board from the top up here. I'm going to do it again right now. So I put a board here on the top beam over here, down to the bottom beam there. I had to cut a little chunk off the back of this beam here, and so I used that piece to set on top of my shelf here, my bracket, and try to gauge if the diameter of that log would line up with the bottom of my piece of wood sitting here. And I see right now I'm a little bit out, but if I pull this log over this way, right there all 3 pieces line up and give me support. So I may have to put a little block in right here in order to keep this from moving in this direction. But right now that lines up nicely there with my strapping, and I think that's going to be the same 36 inches as it is on the other end that we measured. So from the inside in, yeah, now we're at our 36-inch mark. Okay, perfect. So, to do the bracket, again, I friction fitted a piece of 2x4 in here at 14.5 inches, the same width between each wall stud, and I just cut it really accurately so that I knew when I went to put it in there I could tap it in place and just wedge it there. And that was just for the visual to line this all up. Once everything looked like it lined up, I put on another piece of 2x4 on either side, and I nailed those into the wall stud so that my bracket up here sits on top of those 2x4s, and that's what's going to carry the weight of this beam. And then after that, again, came up, I put my beam up in place, so I just had to lift this up and slide the butt end over here and then put the other end up on the other side. And now I've put my strapping down and everything is looking like it lines up nicely here. So we can start nailing the strapping on as soon as I put something there to block that gap from this here moving anywhere. Awesome, things seem to be working out. I just made up a block to go in over here, and I'm just going to tap that into place alongside my log up here, and that's going to keep this log from shifting this direction when I start nailing strapping down into it. Here's a look inside our building at where our main support beams for the greenhouse tie in. We've got one in the corner up there, one here that unfortunately has some rot in it. I'm probably going to pay for that later on down the road. I want to see if maybe I can move this beam a couple inches this way, then shear it off again, and maybe I'll be into better wood. But it is what it is. And then down here, this is our lowest beam here that runs across to support the greenhouse. And I'm just about now to take some of this, what's it called again? Linseed oil. I'm about to take some linseed oil and just treat the ends of these. Hopefully it'll last a few years over here. When I built this shed the other year, I purposely built a very tall rock foundation underneath it. You can go back and look at our videos on that and see how I built the foundation for this. But I did that to set this building up high so that I could get the top beam of my greenhouse maybe 12 feet off the ground, which is where you want it. You like to have a lot of height in a greenhouse. And so, yeah, this enabled me to tie in. And I knew I had those trees on the other side to use to tie in this building. And so it's a very cheap way to get support underneath a building, by using an existing building on this side and 2 live trees on the other side, and then just running 20-foot logs down the entire stretch. I was able to tie this together really cheaply. I'm now ready to tie my strapping in, and hopefully everything here works out. If I'm tight against my building here, I'm 4 inches from the wall, and so I want to be 4 inches from the wall down here. That looks about right. And I'm going to leave most of my overhang on the bottom end because plants tend to grow out that direction towards the sun, right? And so you get wider, bigger plants growing that way. And it might give me a little bit more space. Try to get this accurate because all my other boards are going to line up with this. And what did I do here? 4 inches. Close. Okay, so there's first piece of strapping is on. And now as I come with my strapping this way, because it's a greenhouse, the more pieces you put in, obviously, the more light that you would block from getting down to whatever it is you're trying to grow. And so I'm looking to go probably 24 inches between each piece. And I think that's still going to get, I think it'll still be good enough that it'll support itself, the weight, in the winter time, without sacrificing too much light. So let's look at that when we get another piece up. I could go 18, and it would obviously be sturdier for the plastic if I went 18 inches, but I think that would put a lot of strapping up here blocking light. Hard call. Right there would be 24 inches. this gap between here and here. And if that's nothing but plastic from there down, I think I may have a problem. So I may have to run strapping again going that direction across the entire building. 1, 2, 3, 4, it'd be 5 pieces running down this way in order to make this more of a grid, and that would maybe support the weight of snow in the wintertime. And if I don't do that, I could try every piece 18 inches, but it still leaves a big gap there. What do? I think I'm going to go 24 inches between the boards and buy more strapping to run this way across for my plastic to go down on. I think that's what needs to be done. Okay, so here's the middle post going in. This one here is supporting the lower beam of the greenhouse, right in the middle of the 20-foot span. And I'm getting pretty low on building materials here, so I've got a pretty rotten looking, well, I wouldn't say rotten, but a pretty rough looking log here. Anyway, I'm just going to bang that into place, get my level on it and make sure it's level. That looks about straight going that way. And we're pretty good going this way. Okay, I think I'll spike that from the top. I'll come down through there with a spike, and that should solidify it. This diameter wasn't quite large enough to put my brackets on either side of that, but it's probably the roughest carpentry I've ever done. There, now I have something to support my weight in the middle of my 20-foot span here. That might allow me some faith to put my weight up here on the roof as I come along with my strapping. See, right here I had a poplar tree growing right through the roof of my greenhouse. So I haven't used this year, and I never bothered to get rid of this in case it could have been used as a support pole somewhere, like to support this beam there in the back. So I'm just now getting rid of some of its branches that are in the way of my strapping. I don't want to lose this. Let's try to set that in the tree. Now my next piece of strapping to go on. I'll measure another 24 inches. I'm just trying to judge with my eye how much overhang to do. I'm doing a really rough carpentry job on this today, just to get it done. Too many projects on the go and none of them getting finished. So I got to move some of these along. Okay, and there's 24 inches right there. I do notice now that my middle beam here happens to be down a little bit low from some of these, and I'm having to block them, unfortunately, between my pole and my piece of strapping. So something went wrong when I lined this up, and I'm not exactly sure what it was, but crooks in the log. This one here I notice has a bit of a rise, a hump that way. So maybe that, and between that and the bottom one, it's causing that one to be low out here. But it started off good, and then it just progressively got lower by comparison to my other logs. So very difficult thing to gauge. There's a look at the far end, where our two logs, top and bottom, blend into the trees that we used. And we kept those trees alive because they don't interfere too much with the track of the sun. The sun tends to rise over this direction and come up and overhead. And so I didn't feel the need just yet to do any injury to those. We're going to let them live there. And we really didn't tie much into them. I ended up just cutting some branches off over on this tree and this one. And I think our logs sit down on some branches over there. And then after that we put in our support logs on either side. And then we put in the log that runs here, is strapped on with wire from there down to the lower log and strapped on with wire. And that then allowed for the middle beam to come along and sit on it. And as we go this way, here you can see across where we've tied into our building the same 3 logs, and we've got some of our strapping now coming across at 24 inches. Unfortunately, I think because of the span still between our logs, middle and bottom, middle and top, I think I'm going to have to come with another piece of strapping through there, through the middle of this. We've got some work still to do on the wall there. You can see we're going to space it for, shoot, I can't think. Board and batten. We're going to space our boards over there for a board and batten. And that saves a little bit of wood. And so I've got that to do, and then I have to carry on my my strapping over to the far end there, and then we'll get into plastic. I'm using a simple trick today, doing my board and batten on the shed here, barn, whatever we call it. Eventually, this greenhouse and this building here may be barn facilities. I really haven't decided on which direction I'm going to go, whether I'll use it for a greenhouse or use it for livestock. And so we're confused as to whether we're going to call it our barn or not. But where our greenhouse here is about 12 feet tall, we could have large livestock, like horses even, come in here for shelter. So it gives us potential for a lot of different uses. Doing my board and batten here on the shed today, I'm using a little bit of a hack. That's what my son would call it, I'm sure, a hack. And you just use your level and stick it in between your boards, and so long as you start off with your first board level, your level will butt up against the board that you start with. It'll show level, and then you'll nail your next one on. So simple way to make sure that all your boards are straight up and down. So I'll leave that there for my next nail. And then we'll take our level out. Okay, next piece, same thing. And I cut the top, of course, to match the angle of the roof. There's not much angle on this one, but I cut my tops to match that and measure down from the highest point at the top down to where you want your overhang down here. And that's perfect right there again. Keep your hammer in your hand. Using the level this way makes it go quite a bit faster. That concludes the video for today on our greenhouse slash barn build, depending on what we use it for. I'm bouncing sort of back and forth between this build and our gatehouse builds up at our driveway. So I'm not sure what I'm going to get all done this fall before the snow sets in, and once the snow's down, we're going to have to go back to doing firewood and logging type tasks. So I'm going to try to get everything I can for building projects done before the snow flies here this fall. And anyways, we'll do another update on the greenhouse down here as we progress. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.